Yes, everybody, and welcome back to another daily drop brought to you by Tar Heel Illustrated.com. I'm THI staff writer Jacob Turner. Joining me as he always does, it's our very own publisher, Andrew Jones. And AJ, we're here to talk about some Carolina hoops in this drop as Carolina officially started formal July practices this month. So we're going to be talking about some of that, what it means, and what we can, if anything, and what fans as well can take away from some of these practices, some of these clips that are coming out, and even some of these scrimmage stat lines that you see coming out, which are, I think, interesting and can be misleading at times, to say the least. So, AJ, Carolina can have as many as 10 practices in July. I know we talked about it a little bit before we started recording. They rarely do have all 10 of those practices, but it is maybe a little bit of a different situation this offseason because it's in a lot of ways just a completely new team. I know there is some faces from last year, but there's just so many new faces on that roster that building some of that chemistry, building some of that team camaraderie, and just getting to know each other's games, I think is going to be even bigger emphasis this month than it has been for a while. So give me your thoughts on practice getting going this July and kind of what's going on there for the Tar Heels.
Well, I don't know how many they're going to hold. So I need, at this time, if I find out, I'll post something like in the thread that we tweet this out or on our message board. Yeah. But yeah, put it on our board. What this is different from what we've seen previously is that there's so much more structure to it. So whatever the method to their ultimate madness will be, that process begins this month. Now, they knew some stuff, and there are a lot of basic things to run, and they have, in football, they call them player-led practices. They do a lot of stuff in May and June. If you see some of the things that Carolina tweets out, you'll see coaches in the background, but the formal instruction and, noose around the practice where they can just control the whole process is different when they run these July practices. So for me, with all the newness, it's about getting used to the way Hubert coaches. It's about getting used to the way they run practices and doing it on the same page. It's also about some of the structure. If there are structural changes, it won't be new to the new guys. It'll just be, hey, everything's new to us in that way. But it would be very different and new to RJ and Armando in particular. And then you throw Seth and Jalen in there. So the understanding is that there are tweaks that are taking place, so they have to get used to that. I don't know if you could read too much into the clips that Carolina puts out there because they're not going to put stuff out of air balls. They're not going to put a guy getting, losing his handle driving the lane, and then there's a mosh pit going for the ball. They're not going to put that stuff out there. They're going to put the pretty stuff out there and get people all jazzed up. But, of course, everyone has seen the fast break film. That was fun because that's fun basketball no matter who. You could be watching a practice of Southern Indiana. If they ran that in practice and put a clip out, that'd be a fun clip. So it doesn't really matter who it is. It's a fun clip, although I think Carolina fans personalized it more because you haven't seen a lot of that. They haven't run in 2 years since Hubert came back. A lot of control over offensive possessions and everything else. And the understanding is some or a lot of that could change. And what's important about the July practice is it's sort of like spring football for football programs, is that this is the time you implement some of those things. This is the time you feed the mind that, okay, we're doing things this way now. So when the players then break and they start doing their own thing, they can have that in mind and work on that a little bit because they'll have to develop chemistry, but you also have to develop chemistry by the mission, by executing the actual mission and plan. So going out there and just playing pickup and getting used to one another doing certain things is great. It's hugely important, but going out there and doing it when you're executing the design is even more important. And I think that's some of the benefit they can get from this month. And Hubert gets to see what the hell he has.
Yeah, that's
got important. A lot of new stuff there. So how do these guys mesh together? How do they get along? If there's a tough stretch in practice and he gets all over them, what do the new guys say something? Does a Cormac Ryan step up and smack a few fannies this early in the process? Or does he just sit back and kind of wait for his time? There are a lot of little things that Hubert and his staff can gauge now that will help them when they begin planning for the formal practices to begin in late September. So there's a lot of value to this time of year for them, for sure.
Oh, of course. And I mentioned it earlier, but we talked about how, can have as many as 10 practices a month. Carolina typically does not do that. Can you tell us a little bit about why Carolina typically doesn't? Because I think fans, when they hear you can have 10 practices, they're going to have 10 practices. Again, Carolina doesn't typically do that. Why is that?
I don't know if a lot of people do it. I could speak to Carolina in that there's always been a lot of accountability within the program and a lot of trust. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if Hubert's going to use all 10 or not. I know that Roy didn't use them. Usually there was enough veteran talent back that they could sort of police themselves. And that's also part of opening up an environment for leadership to come through. So if you only do 6 of them and you say, okay, you guys know what to do, I trust you to do it. Well, someone has to step up and be the voice. Mm-hmm. Someone has to step up and corral everyone together in a sense. This is all figurative, of course, and say, okay, guys, we need to work on some of these things. We need to do some of these drills. And then they have to be accountable for whether or not they're doing these things right. So that's just sort of a snapshot response to what you're saying.
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in allowing players to breathe. It's just like a parent. Sometimes you got to allow your kid to screw up because they learn more that way. And they learn more about building accountability and through independence. And I think that when you run a program the way it's been run here for so long in North Carolina, where when they get into a game, a coach generally doesn't micromanage. I think that's been a little bit too much on Hubert's end. You got to lay back. Roy would let them play through stuff. And a lot of that accountability starts in the summertime and just figuring out on your own. There's an element of you got yourself in this mess. You got to get yourself out. But that's why his teams always handled late March situations so well. It's because they were fortified with accountability and self-drive and being able to figure things out on their own without having someone constantly tell them every step. So that's part of why they do that. There's accountability, independence, self-governance, if you will. Those are all things that have always been huge in North Carolina's program. And I think a big part of that is the importance they treat the off season. And a lot of that stuff is born then. So that's my long answer with something that could have been a short answer, but that's as far as I know, that's what I've been told.
Yeah.
And it makes a lot of sense. And with this team, it's an older club, but it's a lot of new pieces. I don't think it'd be difficult at all for them to, in 2 weeks from now, basically run their own practice and do everything the way they're supposed to be done and do it at the same standard.
Yeah, no doubt. And that can obviously benefit a team because you're forcing players to step up and lead. And that's what you want. You want accountability and leadership within the program. You shouldn't have to have a coach tell you what drill to run. You should know because you've been around for so long and it's just second nature at that point. Last thing, AJ, I want to talk about real quickly the offseason scrimmages. There's something that Carolina fans love to talk about. They love to see these stat lines get kind of leaked out. They love to see who's lighting up against these, lighting it up against these former pros or guys who haven't played in the pros for 5 or 10 years, former Carolina players that come back and obviously some really others, they have other guys there that are currently in the league or still playing overseas. So you can get a lot of good experience there. But we've talked about it a lot off camera about how I think people look into these stat lines and performances during the summer a little bit too much. You can even now go on YouTube and find some of these full game scrimmages that somehow somebody who was in the arena was able to record and was allowed to put out. And I remember watching a few of them, and it wasn't the prettiest basketball I've ever seen. It was a lot of ugly shots being thrown up, a lot of missed shots from both teams. And I'm sitting here like, I don't think this is the product we're going to see come November. At least I hope it's not based on what I'm seeing. So talk to me a little bit about why people maybe need to pump the brakes a little bit with reading too much into these scrimmage numbers and scrimmage recaps and reports, because I think people just take a little bit too much out of it from time to time.
Yeah, I would say instead of a little bit, I'd say a lot of it. Way too much.
People love it, man. They love it, AJ.
I'll tell you right now, I'm totally straight up with you. I don't look at any of that. I haven't even watched the videos that have been put out there.
I watched a couple minutes of them, and it was not the prettiest brand of basketball, so I turned it off.
Here's the thing. Some people said, well, you should equate it to spring football. Well, I think there's a lot more value in what you see in spring football that relates to the coming season, because you do not simulate spring football in the offseason. You do a lot of player-led practices, and a lot of that is cohesion, it's scheme-oriented, it's togetherness stuff, but they're not in pads, so it's not football. So in basketball, though, you can simulate, we were just talking about, you can simulate that stuff so much. So what you see now, I mean, Jalen Washington in 4 months when they start playing games should be a different player. That's much more so than what you see a football player at the end of spring practice and then what you see at the beginning of fall camp. I don't think there's as huge a difference there as there should be with any of the guys in the basketball team now, as opposed to when the season starts. So, yeah, if I had a chance to go in there and watch, I would watch. I'd be interested, and I would take a lot of mental notes and everything. But I don't think it pertains to what you should see in the season nearly as much as in football, as the example that I made. And I'll tell you the other thing too. Whenever I have talked to players about their summer and about what they learned and who they went up against, I've never had a kid tell me a stat.
Yeah, like ever. I had 15 against Harrison Barnes. Yeah,
I never. Exactly. It's all about what they learned up here and what they learned here. That's what it's about. And that's the value. So if they're 2 for 20 shooting, like what you saw or whatever it
wasn't great.
That means anything to me this time of year. It doesn't mean anything. Because I'll tell you, every year, the other thing that you hear from these kids is, hey, who was the guy that really stood out in the summer? So often it's a guy that never gets off the bench or doesn't play very well. Or he's really good. And I could name players, but I'm not going to for obvious reasons. I don't want to embarrass anybody. But there's some guys that were great in the summer. And then suddenly they get into a game in November, and it's I'm dating myself here, but it's like Cindy Brady when the red TV light goes on, she froze. And guys are like that. So that's why I don't put a ton of stock into performance this time of year. I do put a lot of stock into what's being learned. I do put a lot of stock into drills and repetition. I put a lot of stock into chemistry. I put a lot of stock into leadership developing, and I put a lot of stock in just to time together. You cannot replace the time together. It is so valuable. But I don't put any stock into how a guy shoots. I don't put anything like that. That's why I'm probably not going to watch the film, to be honest with you. And there's nothing wrong with watching it. I think people that are fans, it makes sense that they would watch it and try to gauge a few things, especially from the new guys, because we've seen them on other teams, but not at North Carolina. So there would be some intrigue there for sure. See what they look like. In fact, I will say this. I do watch the clips that Caroline tweets out,
of course,
in part because they flow by my timeline. And they did one the other day, and I was actually most interested in seeing Withers, Wojcik, and Ryan. But if nothing else, it's just to see them at Carolina. They're wearing the Carolina stuff. So they are immersing themselves into being Tar Heels as we speak. So I think those things are kind of neat.
Yeah.
But cool. I didn't look to see if Ryan's shot went in or not.
No,
didn't matter.
No, you're not going to gauge as much out of it. And again, if people who have seen the scrimmage highlights or watch them, I think people who are diehard Carolina fans are the ones that are probably watching them, so they understand what the intensity looks like in ACC and just non-conference basketball and just in the season. And those intensity levels just don't match. It's a different speed. It's a different pace. You got a lot of older guys playing on the other team. You got usually Carolina runs with its current team, or at least tries to. So it's just a completely different scenario. They're not really playing for much. The intensity level is not the same. And again, that's why if you hear that, Paxton Wojcik had 16 in the pickup scrimmage, great game for him. And that's fantastic for him, but it doesn't mean that does not lead into the season. To me, it doesn't correlate into what's going to happen.
And that's why we don't, and that's, some people have asked, why haven't we done some reporting on it? That's just why we don't. There's nothing wrong with anybody that does.
Yeah, I mean,
it's a great service to the fans, but we have to pace ourselves, especially in the off season. And I don't want to mislead in either way. If Wojcik does have 16, I don't want to say, wow, Patrick Wojcik had 16 points in a June 17th scrimmage. I don't want to mislead. I also don't want to mislead. Paxton Wojcik was 0 over 7 from the perimeter in a June 17th scrimmage. I don't want to mislead either way, because ultimately, whether he's really good on June 17th or really bad on June 17th, it is a small ingredient to what he'll be when they open the season in November against Radford. So
exactly.
We don't fixate on tiny little ingredients when cooking. You might enjoy that process, but you wait until the product is made and ready to eat, right? That's kind of the way I approach basketball teams. Agreed. Again, it's a little bit different in football, understandably so. But that's the way I choose to do it in basketball. And again, I'm going to reiterate one more time. I've never had a kid mention one statistical anything to me when I've asked them about their summer workouts, summer practices in basketball. And I've done it with a lot of different teams, not just here in the Triangle, just a lot of teams around the ACC in what I've done for 20 some odd years. So I've never had a kid say anything about, oh yeah, man, I put 21 up on Tyler Hansbrough one day. No, what was a story that Armando told about?
Yeah,
Tyler?
you had to go to the hospital or something like that.
Yeah, had to go to the hospital. And that's the benefit. Yeah. Tyler's going to come in there and flail elbows all over the place. Deion Thompson, who is still excelling overseas, is going to come in and he's going to show Jalen Washington what man basketball is. That's the value. And the residual effect of that value is what you see when the season starts.
Yeah, completely agree, AJ. And on that note, we'll go ahead and wrap this drop up. I've been Jacob Turner. He's been Andrew Jones. Another episode of the Daily Drop. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell as well, and check out the links in the description. Head over to our website. You can sign up, become a Carolina Insider too for just $8.33 a month. You get so much more access to so much more content. So if you're interested in that, great time to do so during the off season and ahead of fall camp starting. Not too long from now to be here before we know it. And again, make sure you check us out on Twitter and Facebook. Links are below as well. Appreciate y'all watching. See y'all on the next one. Thanks.